It's time for another episode of Let's Talk Business, featuring interviews with South Carolina business executives, community leaders, and government dignitaries. Let's Talk Business is a truly one-of-a-kind business-to-business talk show. And now, here's your host, longtime South Carolina business publisher, Rick Jenkins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina. I'm your host, Rick Jenkins, and I'm glad you're joining us today for episode number 21. Not too long ago, the South Carolina Council on Competitiveness, or SC Competes, released its 2023 Logistics Economic Impact Study. According to this new study, the economic impact of the logistics industry on South Carolina is $48 billion. No surprise then that logistics has been called the lifeblood of state commerce. The study was completed by Dr. Joey von Nessen. Joey is a research economist at the University of South Carolina's Darla School of Business, and he will join the show in a couple minutes to share his findings. SC Competes is a nonprofit organization that drives long-term economic growth by providing research like this. In addition to logistics, they also support the SC Aerospace and SC Tech clusters. A study like this provides actionable research. It empowers policymakers and industries with the information required to grow and sustain competitiveness throughout the state and across the world, really. It also provides deep insight into the opportunities and threats that industries face. But SC Competes isn't just in the business of commissioning research. They also manage the SC Fraunhofer USA Alliance, which provides 50% cash matching for South Carolina firms looking to advance applied research and grow the state's workforce. So thanks to SC Competes for making today's presentation of the Logistics Economic Impact Study possible. We're going to take a quick break, only about 45 seconds or so, and we will be right back, and I'll be joined by Dr. Joey von Nessen to give the Economic Impact Logistics Study. And welcome back to Let's Talk Business South Carolina. I am your host, Rick Jenkins, and I'm glad you're joining us today. And as promised, I am now joined by Dr. Joey von Nessen. He is the research economist, and again, the research economist at the Darla School of Business at the University of South Carolina, and he is here today to talk about the Logistics Economic Impact Report that was commissioned and put together by the South Carolina Council on Competitiveness. And Dr. Van Nessen is here to give it to us and to share the info. Joey, good to see you, man.
Good to see you, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad that you're here. I'll tell you what, I was thinking of you the other day, not only because you were going to be here in the studio, but because I was snooping around on YouTube, just looking, right? And I was looking at stuff, right? And there's Joey's face popped up. You were on SCE TV, and I forget what you were talking about. But you're always somewhere, and you're always talking about something. And I'll tell you what, when it comes to economic analyses, put together in the South Carolina, if there is information to be gathered, if there is statistics to be compiled and forecasts to be made and presentations to be heard, Joey von Nessen is the one that does it, and I'm glad that you're here to do this one today.
Me too. It's great to be here, and there's a lot to talk about. There's always something going on with the economy and our outlook and the great growth that we're seeing in South Carolina.
That's right.
And we're very bullish on the long-run outlook for the state for a variety of reasons, which we can talk about.
You know, the good news in South Carolina, it seems like from a business standpoint, it's such a great place to do business. And it seems that it just continues. Logistics is something that I think that a few years ago, there weren't a lot of people who quite understood what logistics was. I think when COVID reared its ugly head in March of 2020 and we began to have supply chain issues, which all of a sudden people became familiar with supply chain,
yes,
logistics kind of followed that. But before then, I think logistics was an afterthought for so many people.
It really was. And logistics, I like to think of it almost as oxygen. It's the type of thing that you take for granted. You don't notice it until it doesn't work or until you don't have it. And then all of a sudden, it's one of the most important things you can get access to.
Exactly.
And that's certainly what we found in COVID. especially with respect to these supply chain constraints that you're talking about.
Right.
And we've seen logistics grow in South Carolina, and that's one of our competitive advantages here is this sector, which we looked at.
Yeah.
And one reason why we've done so well.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into all of that, but like I usually do on this show, before we get into all of that, I want to talk about Joey just for a second. I have met you a few times over the course of the years. But I don't know a whole lot about you, and I'm sure there's plenty of viewers that don't either. Are you from South Carolina?
I am. I'm from Columbia originally.
You're
Grew
from
up in
Columbia.
Columbia.
Okay.
And actually did my undergraduate in Greenville at Furman University.
Okay.
And then went back to USC to do my PhD in economics and stayed on afterwards as a research economist, and have been doing that ever since.
All right. So you have been doing what you do. You have found your niche. You have found what you love to do. And you are known for doing that. People go to Joey when they need this kind of thing, right?
Well, I enjoy doing it, and there's a lot to learn about the state's economy, a lot we can do,
right?
And I think a thirst for knowledge about the local economy and the national economy as well. What I like to call what the type of work that I do, and I say this half jokingly, but really to make a serious point, is I focus on so what economics. And meaning that we look at economic data and we're always asking that question, so what? How can we use economic data to help businesses and organizations and various organizations, nonprofits, the Commerce Department, everyone in South Carolina, how can we help them make good business decisions and give them the actionable information that they need?
Right.
So always asking the question, so what? How do we use those data?
Yeah, I like that. Did I see, and am I correct in saying that you do maybe an annual analysis on behalf of the University of South Carolina for the state itself in terms of our economic positioning? You do that, right, every year?
Correct. We have our USC Economic Outlook Conference that's put on by the Darla School of Business.
Okay.
And we just recently completed that for our outlook for 2024. And it is an annual event where we look at the state's outlook and to a lesser extent the national outlook, because of course national conditions are affecting us here in South Carolina,
right,
and provide an overview of what our expectations are for the upcoming year at the state and to a large extent at the local level as well within South Carolina.
Did you say that's already occurred?
Yes,
event?
that just occurred earlier this month. It's always the second week in December is when we do it.
Got it. Okay. Well, good stuff. What do you say we talk logistics, Joey?
Absolutely.
I think before we go too far, I want to define logistics. Okay, I mean, there's probably folks that are going to be watching that wouldn't mind to hear some type of simple definition, and I'll tell you what I think, and then you tell me what you think. I mean, from my perspective, the business of logistics is basically the management of maybe acquiring a product, storing a product, and delivering a product, if I had to break it down, right?
Yes.
I mean, you get that product, you put it in a warehouse, you put it on a train, you do whatever, you ship it over here, and you deliver it right there. That's logistics to me. Is that logistics?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And what we wanted to do is get a comprehensive assessment of how we see all aspects of transportation and the management and the movement of goods through the economy. Right. All industries that are focused and that are included in that definition. And so that, of course, includes transportation companies themselves, but it also includes other things. For example, if you think about a retailer like Walmart is a great example. Walmart is not a logistics company per se. They're defined as a retailer, but Walmart hires a lot of truck drivers and a lot of
warehouse, right?
Exactly. And so they're distributing goods all over the country. And so we wanted to make sure we captured all the transportation functions with a company like Walmart, for example, as well. And what we find is that when we do that, that logistics really does permeate most of South Carolina's sectors and most of the economy as a whole. And in fact, the industry is far larger when you capture those additional elements rather than just focusing on transportation-based companies.
I'm glad you brought that up because, of course, that makes perfect sense. It's logical, but I never really stopped to think about it. I never really stopped to think about how a company like Walmart or Amazon locally might, play into the logistics business in South Carolina. But of course they do.
Yes.
You think of the bigger things, which I want to talk about now. We know a thing or two in South Carolina about making stuff, right? We know how to make stuff, whether it is manufacturing a car or a boat or a jet or the tires that they ride on. We know about manufacturing stuff, but we're also becoming pretty adept at delivering those things as well, hence the logistics piece of it. And so a couple things that I'd like to hear your comments on. One, Port of Charleston. now the deepest port on the eastern seaboard.
Yes.
One of the fastest growing container ports in the United States. 2 inland ports, Greer, Dillon.
Yes.
Thousands of miles of rail and tens of thousands of miles of state-maintained highways, right? We have got infrastructure here to a pretty good degree, yes?
Absolutely. And it's been very clear that it's one of the main competitive assets of our state. We see that not only through actually observing it, as you just pointed out, but also from what companies tell us. When companies come to South Carolina and they locate here, especially the manufacturers, they are often asked, why are you coming to South Carolina? What's driving that location decision? And there are 2 main answers that they always give, workforce being one and infrastructure being the other. And infrastructure is that we call it the lifeblood of commerce. And there's a reason for that, because companies are consistent about that. And the Port of Charleston is probably the principal asset of the state, or at least a principal asset, because it really serves as the anchor point for that infrastructure. And that's just a major benefit to South Carolina, and it's what drives our economic competitiveness. There's no question about that.
Right. Joey, you mentioned here just a second ago, I alluded to it at the top of the show, that you're referring to logistics as the lifeblood of state commerce. I would assume that logistics began being important in 1992 when BMW announced, right? I'm sure it was important before then, of course. But that's when our South Carolina's economy began to, I think, transition to one of advanced manufacturing, which, of course, could not exist to a great degree without the logistics infrastructure that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And we've seen that growth in advanced manufacturing over the past 30 plus years. It actually began even before then, when Michelin arrived in South Carolina back in the 1970s. And advanced manufacturing has been the principal driver of our growth, of South Carolina's growth over the previous decade. Before the pandemic, it's going to continue to expand and grow in the coming decade. That's very clear. We're becoming more and more attractive to manufacturers. And these are export-oriented manufacturers as well. So South Carolina companies are producing here, manufacturers produce locally, and we're seeing goods exported across the world. And that's another reason, again, why infrastructure is so important, because one of the things that many people don't realize is about 2/3 of the population in the United States lives east of the Mississippi. And so if you think about South Carolina as in terms of where it's located, that shows us that companies that are coming here, that are manufacturing goods here, and then trying to access both the U.S. market and the global market, well, all of a sudden, they have access to the majority of the U.S. population being in South Carolina, and they have access to the global market through the Charleston port. So that puts South Carolina in a very strong position, and that's one major reason why we do see these manufacturers consistently looking at South Carolina.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I did not know that the population was that dense east of the Mississippi, although, of course, it makes sense. Let's talk about the overall economic impact. $48 billion to the South Carolina economy. And before we go much further, because I want to compare it to the prior study that was done, there was a study done in 2017. Excuse me, let's just back up a second. A study done in 2017 and a study done in 2020. The 2020 study came on the heels of COVID.
Yes.
Right, and so I'm not sure how much value that we got out of that because the last few years have been a unicorn of sorts.
Right, yes.
Right, and so now they got the 2023 study that just came out. Has the Council on Competitiveness, they have commissioned all three of these,
correct,
right?
Yes.
Now the Council, there are a few clusters in South Carolina that they really focus on, more than a few, but the ones I'm talking about are SC Tech, SC Aero, and of course logistics itself. And so have you done all three of the studies?
Yes.
17 was the first.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
Okay.
And then, 17 was the first, and then 2020, but that used all pre-COVID data. So that allowed us to see how logistics was growing basically in the second half of the last decade.
Right.
And then this was our first look at what's been happening since the pandemic, where, of course, the whole paradigm of the economy has changed.
Got it. Okay. So, excuse the tangent. But now we're up to 2023, and we've got an economic impact, according to your study, of about $48 billion.
Yes.
And if we compare that back to 2017, which is why I wanted to go back there, it is a huge increase. I forget, 40-some percent.
Yes, about
right?
46%.
46%. And what has been driving that, Joey?
So great question. So if we look at the past 6 years overall, going all the way back to 2017, we've seen a steady increase in our population growth in the Southeast and in South Carolina, and we've seen a steady growth in advanced manufacturing. And both of those have been driving the growth. So going back to our conversation about manufacturing, this is an incredibly competitive area of the country for manufacturers to be in because of the geographic location. Because manufacturers have access again to the port, they're able to manufacture here, ship goods in the United States and all over the world. They have access to workforce, have access to talent. So we're seeing more and more manufacturers coming here, and so logistics is responding to that demand. The second element is, as we look at population growth overall, not only is our population expanding, but it's projected to continue to increase, not just in South Carolina, but throughout the whole Southeast. And if we look at projections across the board from the U.S. Census and other forecasting entities, all of them very consistent. The Southeast is going to see more population growth over the next 2 decades than any other region of the country. And we might think, well, why does growth in the Southeast necessarily matter? Well, if we look at companies like Amazon and Walmart and other distribution centers, they're not just interested in population growth in South Carolina, but they want to be where they can access all of these customers and deliver goods as more people are buying things online. So what we find when we look at the population distribution in the Southeast is that in South Carolina, you can actually reach more people faster than in any other state. So to put some numbers on that, within about a 1-day drive, about an 8-hour drive of South Carolina, you can reach close to 68 million people. Compare that to Florida, which, even though Florida itself has a much larger population than South Carolina, because it's so large, you can only reach about 35 million people within an 8-hour drive. So the bottom line is, because the Southeast as a whole is growing, and because South Carolina is right in the heart, right in the middle of the Southeast, we have more access to that population base, and that's very attractive for companies, particularly when they've got the port right on their back door that can help them.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I would assume the same logic would apply to rail deliveries in terms of time.
Exactly.
Within, right.
And the whole eastern seaboard. It's not just the Southeast, but the Southeast is where we're seeing the most population growth, and companies see that too. They recognize where they're going to need to be located to be able to deliver these goods.
We're comparing to 2017, and that's where the 46% increase comes. Let's talk about what has happened here since 2017 from a manufacturing, hence, logistics perspective. Boeing, when did Boeing arrive?
Boeing arrived in 2007, I believe.
2007, and then they did their expansion.
Yes.
Yes. And what year was that expansion?
Expansion was in the mid-teens. I don't remember what year that was announced.
It was around the 17 thing that I was thinking, and I knew you would know these dates better than me. Volvo.
2015 is when they announced.
Right. And so all of these things happening kind of on the heels of the beginning of when this study started, and hence you're seeing in the years past that as the suppliers probably join the manufacturers in South Carolina, where logistics impact continues to go up.
Exactly.
Let's talk about employees. Total employment, 150,000 people, if I've got this right, in the logistics industry, up 32% from 2017.
Yes, a sizable increase, and reflects that increase in demand. And we wanted to make sure that we were comprehensive, as we talked about before, capturing all employees across all sectors that are doing logistics work. So again, getting back to specific examples of truck drivers, the truck drivers is the easiest example to illustrate the point, but truck drivers at Walmart count. If we look at logistics functions taking place at BMW, we included those as well. And more generally, if we look at the employment base, about 95% of those employees are engaged in the actual transportation of goods from one business to another, or from businesses to the final consumer. And then another 5% are what we call the embedded functions, which basically just means the management of that transportation process. So these are going to be supply chain managers, logisticians, those types of managerial and oversight functions. So that's about 5%. The other 95% are actively engaged in the transportation of goods.
When I look at the numbers also in terms of comparisons to 2017, one thing that really stands out is the total compensation that are paid to logistics employees, which tells me they're paid pretty well. $8.9 billion, up 65% from 2017.
Yes. And part of that is, so there are two points to be made on that. Number one is we see the wage premium for workers in the logistics sector as a significant one over the average wage in South Carolina. So workers those 150,000 employees are making more on average than the average job in South Carolina. So there's a significant wage premium there. And then secondly, part of that wage change since 2017 is also due to the pandemic. So I always like to caveat that. The wage premium is still significant and the wage growth has happened, including real wage growth, but part of it is due to the fact that we've seen such high inflation rates since 2020. So we've seen more wage growth as a result across all industries. But that being said, the wage growth has increased, and the wage premium is higher now than it was in 2017. So we're seeing real gains in addition to just those adjustments due to inflation.
Do you know what the average wage is compared to South Carolina as a whole?
Well, South Carolina as a whole, the average wage is about $55,000. And depending on the subset of logistics, we see the average wage around $60,000 to $70,000 plus. So it can be very significant.
What about advanced manufacturing wages?
Advanced manufacturing is in that ballpark as well. So we see the demand growing, wages growing as well for advanced manufacturing. So both of these sectors represent high-skilled positions that typically need advanced training, that are typically in very high demand. So in both cases, we see wage premiums over the average job in South Carolina. And the other element with logistics, again, part of that 150,000 is going to be in manufacturing as it's traditionally defined, because again, we're trying to pick up those transportation-related functions at advanced manufacturers as well.
You know, let's switch gears here for a minute, Joey, and I want to talk about workforce. Talked about it a little bit earlier. You know, South Carolina, we wouldn't have all of these companies that come in if we didn't have a good workforce and things like the technical college system to help support that workforce and prepare them for advanced manufacturing jobs. However, as we all know, we have workforce challenges. We have more jobs than we can fill. More jobs that we can find people that have the skill sets to fill certain types of those advanced manufacturing jobs. Is logistics in a similar boat in terms of challenges? I mean, we're talking about different types of things, not the embedded jobs that you mentioned ago. We need truck drivers, right?
Yes.
And that is not always easy to come by, is it?
No, it's not. We do see a shortage of truck drivers and more generally a shortage of workers pretty much across all industries in South Carolina and to a large extent across all industries in the United States. The key there, though, when we're thinking about it from a competitiveness standpoint, is that we need to be more competitive in terms of providing workers for companies than our neighbors, than other states. So recognizing that this labor shortage is a problem for everybody, are we doing more to solve it or providing more resources for companies than our neighbors? And that's where programs like the technical college system, like Ready SC, Apprenticeship Carolina, and other similar programs have been very successful. Companies have been clear that's one of the major reasons why they're in South Carolina. We talked before about the port and infrastructure as being something that they publicly state as a reason why they're here. Well, these programs are also a reason why they're here. And I think going forward, we just have to recognize that we're going to have to do more of this. Again, we've done a great job of job training, but we're going to have to do more because this labor shortage is not a short-term phenomenon. It's not COVID related in and of itself. There's more to it than that. And so this labor shortage is going to be with us for the next several years, and companies are going to have to address it proactively in logistics and in trucking and across all industry sectors.
You mentioned how we compare and if we are competitive with our neighbors in terms of workforce challenges. Are we competitive? I don't have a feel for this, and let's just choose North Carolina as an example. Are we competitive with North Carolina in the way that we are approaching solving some of these issues and getting workers available for those manufacturers?
We have been competitive with respect to these programs. This has been something that, again, companies have said very clearly and repeatedly. That's why they're coming to South Carolina. Regions like North Carolina, we see other draws to that area. So, for example, if we're looking to retain talent in South Carolina, speaking more generally across all industry sectors, we have to look at which regions are where are we losing people to. And from North Carolina's perspective, we sometimes lose workers to Charlotte because there are a lot of opportunities there, and also Atlanta. That's another area where we typically can lose, particularly younger workers too. So we have to just keep in mind where are these workers going and how do we retain them more effectively. And we can do that. We have a high quality of life. We have a low cost of living. We have a lot of opportunities. And so we just need to build on that. We need to brand the state. We need to match people who are here, workers who are here with jobs, make it easy for them to stay. I hear all the time from young people that they want to stay in South Carolina and they're looking for a reason to do it. And so we just have to provide them with the opportunities there.
We talked about at the top of the show, and you mentioned as well in the study itself that you anticipate or that we are in a good spot for South Carolina to be the premier logistics hub in the southeastern United States. And so let's just kind of summarize that and go back to what, in your view, is going to make that happen. And we've already talked about these things, but I just kind of want to sum up here. One, we've got population increases, maybe more so than other places coming in the next decade, right? People love South Carolina. They want to move to South Carolina, right? We have
and in the Southeast.
And the Southeast.
That's the other
piece.
It's not just correct. About South Carolina. It's that South Carolina is in the heart of the region of the country that's going to see that population growth. And from a company perspective, they're looking to be as close to the final consumer as they can be, and South Carolina is the ideal location for that.
Yes, and then from an infrastructure perspective, deepest port on the eastern seaboard, plenty of rail, 2 inland ports, well situated geographically between Atlanta and Charlotte, two interstates and so forth and so on.
Exactly.
Right. And auto manufacturing continuing to grow, and you are anticipating that advanced manufacturing is going to continue to grow in the next decade, which of course drives the need for logistics help. Anything I'm missing?
Well, I would just expand from and define advanced manufacturing. So automotive manufacturing is certainly a key piece of that, but aerospace as well is going to continue to expand in this region, and the tire sector. So all those are, of course, intertwined, and their supply chains are somewhat connected.
Right.
But that's typically for viewers who aren't familiar with it. The term advanced manufacturing, that's generally what we mean: automotive, aerospace, and tires. And on all three of those, we expect to continue to grow.
There is a term that you used in your study that I was not familiar with, even though I could take a guess at it, but it's durable goods bubble.
Yes.
And
yes.
You say that it is deflating. Define that for me and tell me how it's impacting us.
So great question. So essentially what we've seen since 2020 has been an overheated economy that emerged shortly after the COVID recession in 2020. And that resulted for two reasons. One is we saw a rapid labor market recovery as the economy reopened. So people were going back to work. They were earning wages and spending those wages. But the second piece was $6 trillion in stimulus. And I like to say that the U.S. economy has been on a caffeine high for the last few years, and we're now coming off of that caffeine high. And part of that was what generated that durable goods bubble. So in 2020 and 2021, we see this significant amount of funding injected into the U.S. economy. But what were we all doing? We were all staying home. We weren't going to restaurants. We weren't getting on planes. We weren't traveling.
Right.
So all that money, or a sizable percentage of that money, was spent in the goods sector when we were staying home. What were we doing? Buying cars to the extent that we could. We were moving. We were renovating our homes. So think about all the goods that you buy when you're renovating. And so essentially we saw this infusion of funding into the goods market, especially into durable goods. So that's where we come with the term durable goods bubble. it peaked in 2021. Then beginning in 2022, when interest rates started to rise as the Fed was trying to get a handle on inflation, we began to see the cost of borrowing money go up. And so what are the biggest durable goods? Well, housing-related goods and manufacturing-related goods. And so those are the industries that have seen some pullback in 2022 and in 2023. We've seen those effects locally here in South Carolina. And as that durable goods bubble deflates, that's, of course, going to impact logistics as well. But that's a short-term phenomenon that doesn't affect our long-run bullish outlook for the South Carolina economy. But it does mean we're expecting slower growth in 2024 because we're still continuing to readjust from that bubble.
Right. Well, I'm going to get you out of here on this, and it's a good place to ask this question right at the end of you talking about that. In 2026, there will be another study, at least I'm assuming, that the Council on Competitiveness, or SC Competes, will come back to you, Joey, and say, hey, let's do this sucker again. What do you think in 2026 is going to show?
Well, I think there's almost no question we're going to see additional growth in the industry. I think all the trends point in that direction. All the signs of all the structural changes that we're seeing in South Carolina's economy point to continued growth in logistics because of these population gains that we're expecting, because of more growth in advanced manufacturing, including aerospace, including the automotive sector, including the tire sector. So it's just a matter of how much growth we see, how quickly we see it. But I think you can safely say that however competitive South Carolina was in 2019 going into the pandemic, we are even more competitive now because all of the advantages that we had before have been strengthened by the pandemic and by the fundamental changes we've seen in the economy. And so, again, that's great news for us long term.
Right. Joey, good stuff.
Thank you, Rick.
Appreciate you being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Folks, that is Joey Von Nessen. Joey is the research economist at the Darla Moore School of Business at the University of South Carolina. And thank you to the South Carolina Council on Competitiveness. This impact study would not be possible without those guys. As I mentioned earlier in the show, they, of course, support not only the logistics industry, but also SC Aerospace and SC Tech, as well as other industries, clusters throughout South Carolina. So thanks to those guys. Thank you, Joey, and appreciate you guys joining another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina. We will see you next time.